and welcome to this February 2016 case study analysis. My name is Nick Best, and what I'm going to be doing is taking you through this video series through a whole range of different elements in relation to this exam. We'll be looking at the strategic analysis, doing an E3 type strategic analysis on the case. We'll be having a look at risk and P3, and we'll look at F3 and funding, and we'll take a look at the numbers and analyse what that means for this case. We'll look at the industry, analyse that. I'm going to go through my top 10 issues and analyse those for you as well. And in this first video, what I'm going to do is go through the first 2 pages of the case study, but we've got huge amounts of information actually, and so in this first one I'll be going through that with you as well, really pulling out some of those, and we'll go on through the remaining videos analysing the case study as a whole. So let me just start off by telling you a little bit more about me and the video series as a whole, before then we move on to actually start analysing the case itself. Okay, so my name is Nick Best and I'm Managing Director here at Astranti, and I have been working at the final level case study now for 9 years. I have seen literally thousands of people's mock scripts. I have seen it must be 30, 40 different case studies now. I've analysed those case studies. I've worked with students both in class, both online. I've tutored this level at both BPP, Kaplan, First Intuition, Reed Business School. Before then I set up Astranti, and so I've got a huge amount of experience helping people with this exam. And why is that important during this analysis? Well, I think the key thing is what I can do is I can use all my experience of all those previous cases, of everything that the students do well, what students struggle on, and I can bring up the key points for you as they relate to this particular exam, this particular pre-scene. Because the reality is, I know a lot of students, when they see the pre-scene, they kind of go through it and they kind of read it through, but very often they're not sure how to interpret it, what it means for the exam and how you use it in the exam and how you use it as part of strategic analysis. Many people have studied E3, but what they've never done is they've actually never done a full strategic analysis of a whole company and pulled together all the different models. And so I can use all my experience and guidance to help to support you basically in your analysis of the pre-scene, and that's what I'm going to be doing then. So in this video series then, this first video series is on the pre-scene analysis, and in the pre-scene analysis videos I'm going to start with an E3 focus. Now E3, you may remember, is business strategy. We're going to be going through key points as they relate to the different business models. We'll be talking about pastel analysis and 5 forces analysis and so on, critical success factors, mission statements, basically a lot of the focus of what it means to set up a business and its strategy. But we'll be very much going through section by section, reading through the case. I'll go through paragraph by paragraph, pulling all the key points out for you. Okay. We'll also focus on the industry. We've got a particular section actually in this video. As we go on later on, I'll be talking about some of the industry issues. We've got some talk on the very first page of the case on the industry. I'll also pull out what I think are the most likely exam issues. As far as the pre-scene goes, what you very regularly see is that the pre-scene is written with the exam variants in mind. And so though of course there are 5 different exam variants, you could see any one of those, there'll be a lot of hints as to what types of issues are going to arise in the exam. And so having seen hundreds of these different types of issues, I'll be able to hopefully pull out for you what I think the key issues are as they relate to each section as we go through. As I think about it as we're going through, I'll also give you exam hints and tips. Now of course we've got a whole different series, our course video series, our exam advice series, which goes through exactly how to prepare for and plan exam technique, which is absolutely critical for passing this exam. But as and when things occur to me during the recording of these videos, I'll go through those with you as well. Okay. So once we've been through with an E3 focus, we'll then do F3, focusing very much on the numbers, the funding, finance, and then P3 will focus mostly, a little bit on IT, but mostly on risk, a little bit on foreign exchange and things like that that are in P3. But it's going to primarily be risk. What are the key risks in this industry? What does that mean for this company and potentially then for your exam. Second sort of set of videos is my strategic analysis. So what I'm going to do is pull together a full strategic analysis where we'll look at a whole range of different types of models. And you can see the ones on there. They're all the typical business strategies models, 5 forces, Pastel. We'll look at governance and ethics, product life cycle, and source matrix. All of those that are relevant for this Rio case study, I'll pick out, pull them together and analyze those for you. What that will do is, should you find any of those useful in the exam, and now here's my first bit of exam tip for you, is that many people come into this case study exam thinking they're going to be asked to do the product life cycle or do a Porter's 5 forces analysis, you know, the things you learn to E3. But that's a very, very rare question. A far more common question would be a question asking you, for instance, let's say we took product life cycle, where you have to analyze whether to do a new product or not. Now, as part of that, you can bring in your knowledge of the product life cycle to help you to decide. You can look at a current company's products and you can say, well, actually, we haven't got any growth products in our current position, and this would be a new growth product, it's a new growth area, and we can therefore bring that in. So you can then use this to help you answer the questions. Occasionally you can use a model as a whole. The examiner commented last year, actually this exam last year, on how people had used Pastel very, very well to answer a question on risk and risk management. So there are some models that you can kind of use the whole model to help support you. There are other models that are really easy to use. Stakeholder analysis is one, very, very good and easy to bring up in the exam. Okay, and source matrix is another great one. And you can gain marks for discussing models, but what you won't do in this exam is you won't be gaining marks for describing what Porter's 5 forces is. Okay, I mean, a quick paragraph explaining it before you move on and use it, yes, maybe you'll get a mark for, but beyond that, you know, you're not going to get marks for just knowing what the models are. It's use of the models to support your answer that is key. Okay, and as part of the strategic analysis, I will go through explaining that, and I will end up with my strategic plan, how I think that the business should go forward in the future. And that strategic plan is very useful, because what you can then do, and if you're not going to go ahead and purchase all the rest of the video series here, what you can do is come up with what you think your strategic plan is. You can go through doing all the models yourself, and then when you're actually in the exam looking at a new issue, let's say there was a new issue and it was a potential new product, you can say, well, is that product consistent with the direction that I would take this business forward based on my strategic plan? Okay, and that's where that comes in useful, is you can always bring everything back to, is this consistent with the way forward for this business? Okay, so yeah, do it yourself if you don't go through finding mine. Okay, next element in the whole video series is my top 10 issues. I go through my top issues in order from 10 down to 1, using a range of experience. I cover why they're likely to come up. What is it in relation to the pre-seen past exams? We see lots of certain types of questions come up again and again. So where there's a hint in something that's in the pre-seen that also relates through to something that's also in the that comes up quite a lot, those are going to be up there towards the top of my top 10 issues list. Okay, and sometimes we just see things that are kind of obscure in the pre-seen, probably unlikely to come up. Okay, what we'll then do is, for each of those most likely issues, is cover what the key points are to pass. Okay, and then key models for each of those issues, which models you can bring up as part of your exam in order to, different types of issues require different models. Okay, I talked about the products and product life cycle a moment ago, and that's an obvious one if you saw a new product. So if one of my top issues was a new product, that one would be very, very relevant. Okay, again, I know some people are just watching this as a sample video, or they've just bought the first set of video issues. You can do that yourself, of course. You can create your list of issues using the pre-seen. Of course, I've got the advantage of having seen many, many, many cases before, but it's a good way for you to prepare if you do that yourself. Okay. Then we've also got our industry analysis. We'll be examining the the fashion retailing industry, look at some real life competitors, analyze one of those competitors in detail, and then most importantly, give you specific industry examples you can include in your script. Now, what's worth remembering is that the examiners have made it very clear. If you look, for instance, at the post-exam guide from March 2015, okay, they've said specifically they were very disappointed at the number of specific industry examples that people were using. So what you need to do is learn some industry examples of your own and bring those in to the exam questions. And what we do for you in our industry analysis is we give you some specific industry examples, as well as our generic industry analysis. Okay, those very, very specific ones that you can learn and then you can incorporate because you can relate those to specific issues that come up. And in the video series, I will be going through the broad industry analysis, looking at the real life competitors, talking about some of those industry examples as part of the video series. Okay, so let's go back to this particular video series then, which is the Preseen Analysis videos, where I go through the Preseen step by step. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing, section by section. I'm going to be assuming that you've got no prior knowledge, okay? And so what I'm not going to do is talk about things later on. So let's say there's something on page 20 and we're only on page 2. I'm going to assume you haven't read on to page 20. And that, you know, there's an issue that I kind of know that's going to come up, but I just sort of play as if, well, that's something else for us to look on to later on. The idea is therefore you and me, we can sort of go through together right from scratch, assuming that you've got no prior knowledge of that Preseen analysis. You may have read it through if you wanted to, but I will assume that you won't have done that. Okay, I will get you to read a section first and make your own notes before then giving you my review. I know a lot of people are very tempted just to listen to my review, and it kind of saves you time that way, but you lose a real benefit if you don't do it yourself first. I really do think it's really beneficial if you think it through all of your own and then add my comments onto those. I think you learn a lot more that way. And that's the way I recommend you doing. So what I'll do is at the start of each video, I'll say, right, we're going to cover the next 4 pages or 2 pages, whatever is a useful chunk. Okay. Most of the videos go on for 30, 40 minutes. And it's normally for that kind of chunk that I will be kind of guiding you into how much for you to review. Okay, and so once we've finished all the different sections, we'll do a video on F3 looking at all the numbers, and P3 looking at all the key risks, and really anything else that relates to funding in relation to F3 and issues like IT and so on in relation to P3. So that's how this video series is going to work. And finally, before we sort of head into the case itself, it's worth bearing in mind just some points for you on the Preseen. The Preseen itself is just context. It is background. I had someone just before the last exam, it was literally one day before the last exam, and they said, Nick, I've bought your video analysis series and I've been through it all and I've been through the Preseen in detail. Is that enough for me to pass? And my head and my heart just fell at this particular point, because the Preseen is the background. It is the context. It is not the exam itself. The student thought that perhaps by knowing all my top 10 issues that they'd be able to go into the exam and just answer the exam questions. You know what? Knowing the Preseen is a very, very important part of passing this exam, but it is one element of passing. Okay? The Preseen is background. It is context. You should not be pre-writing anything out or pre-thinking about your answers. You shouldn't have like a pre-prepared answer before you go in. You need to deal with these specific issues that come up in your variant, these specific questions that are being posed for you. And therefore, to get good at that, you need to have practiced a whole range of questions. You need to have exam technique really nailed. You need to know how to plan answers, how to write answers out in a way that scores marks. You need to have practiced lots and lots of mock exams on the Rio Preseen, and then brought in your industry examples and used your industry knowledge as background, as context to guide where your answers are, because the best answers use the pre-seen as part of it, but the answers are not based on the pre-seen. Hopefully you understand what I mean. The pre-seen is background to be used. It is not the answer itself. That student went on and failed, and it really wasn't a surprise to me because they'd done part of what was necessary, but not the whole lot. Okay, so bear that in mind as we head into this analysis of the pre-seen. Okay, so let's head into the pre-seen itself then, and in this section we are going to look at the first 2 pages. So as we head down here, okay, we'll be having a look at this page, a little bit of background on Rio, what your role is, and then we've got a big section on the fashion industry setting. Now, as you start reading through this yourself, remember this idea, you read through and then I'll go through it with you. As you read through yourself the section on the fashion industry setting, be thinking of 2 key models here. Be thinking of your pastel analysis and be thinking of your Porter's 5 forces, and be thinking of how you can apply those models, because this tells you about the industry as a whole that we're operating within. Then we go on to learn some specifics about the company. Overview of Rio's operations, Rio's history, coming down here a little bit about their shareholdings, raising some finance, there's a bit of F3 funding in there. Okay, and that's going to be it for this particular video. We're just going to do the first 2 pages in this particular one. So read down those 2 pages. Once you've finished, you've done all the analysis that you can do, come back then and I will give you my perspective on this particular section. Okay, so welcome back. I hope you've gone away and done your own analysis there. So, okay, let's go right to the start then. And let's start off with your role. You are a senior finance manager. No surprise there, but notice the word finance in there. That gives you a focus on the financial elements of the business. Okay, but giving advice on special projects and strategic matters. Now, this is the examiner opening up the opportunity for you to be advising on specific projects. So that could be perhaps a new product, or perhaps it could be investing in new stores, or going into a new country, or something like that. And of course, this is the nature of this exam at this level. You would be expected, for instance, to analyse, should we go overseas? Now we find actually just down below, they're already in 36 different countries. Well, should they go into Africa or into the US where they aren't at the moment? What would be the advantages and disadvantages of those? So this opens up that very generic project-based opportunity. Very often the exam is based around one big issue. It could be something like should we go overseas to the US or to Africa or to some other new country where we aren't at the moment, and then the whole of the exam is based around that particular project, and you'll be asked very different questions in the different sections based around that one big project. That's a very common approach. In fact, when the exams came out last time round, a lot of people were complaining about that. They were kind of saying, well, the whole thing was based around one project or one particular issue, and it was kind of quite narrow. And this is often the way that the examiner plays it, is this kind of quite narrow project. But then they'll ask you various different elements that will hopefully test all your knowledge from E3, F3, P3 based around that, to show that you are able to be a good qualified accountant, which is what you're hoping to be, of course, once you've passed this. But the second thing there, of course, is strategic matters. The issues themselves will tend to be big picture, strategy focused about change and change management, or something that's going to affect the business as a whole. And hence the word strategy is it's not really a surprise to us, because we know this is relevant to all the different strategic case studies, but it does focus you very much on, look, this is big picture, this is strategy. Knowing your business strategy models and how that's going to link into the business is very important. What we also mustn't miss is who you are reporting to. In different case studies, you're reporting to different people. In fact, most commonly, you're reporting to the kind of board of directors as a whole. So it's interesting to me to see that in this case, you're reporting to the finance director rather than the board as a whole. That tends to suggest that questions might be posed to you by the finance director. I'm kind of guessing you know by now that the format of the exam is 3 roughly hour-long sections where you're given an email or a memo, or you have a discussion with someone, and then from that discussion or that memo you then have to go and answer their questions and deal with it. Now, this is suggesting to me that the most likely person in this exam you're going to get that from is the finance director. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that they've got finance knowledge. Whereas if you were writing to the HR director or even the CEO, they wouldn't have the detailed financial knowledge of the finance director. It's also worth bearing in mind that they've got a financial interest. They are very interested in things like funding, for instance. And so you bringing up those sorts of financial related issues is going to get you good marks because of who you're likely to be writing to. Now, you always need to answer the specific question asked, but knowing who you're writing to and posing it in a way, for instance, going back to financial knowledge, you can just talk about things like NPV with the complete knowledge that they should know what that means. Okay, you can just bring up terms NPV and net present value, and you're not worried about this is going to the board and it's going to an HR manager or something like that won't understand what you mean. So this is quite useful from your point of view, but bear that in mind. Pose your answers in a way that assumes a lot of knowledge and with a financial focus to assume you are writing to the finance director, where this is tending to hint at. Okay, so we start to learn a little bit more about Rio themselves. Okay, they operate a large number of retail stores across several Asian and European countries. Okay, and they sell fashion clothing and accessories. So we can immediately see the kind of business we're talking about here. It could be someone like Superdry or Fat Face or River Island or H&M or any one of those multitude of different fashion clothing and accessories type companies. And of course the one I mentioned are primarily ones in the UK. And here is an issue in itself. They operate across several different European and Asian countries. So there will be different competitors. It says down here that the fashion industry is very dynamic and competitive. And as a first point of view, I'm just going to put in there Porter's 5 forces. Not question mark forces, but Porter's 5 forces. Because one of our 5 forces is competition. And competition then is very high. It's a very fast-changing industry where everyone's very competitive against each other. There are huge numbers of competitors, but also don't forget that there are competitors in each of the different markets. So let's put in here different competitors in each overseas market. Because of course what tends to happen is that retailers, they start off in their home country and then they gradually expand overseas. And of course, as we were going a little bit further down, this is what we found out actually started to happen over the page down here when we look at Rio's history. That's what happened in this particular case as well. So watch out for that. This is a very competitive market. If you get a question about expanding more overseas, remember that there'll be competitors in each of those different overseas markets. The other thing that this raises, of course, is foreign exchange. So there'll be different currencies in each of those markets, and this is not a surprise to us. What we see in the case study generally, we see foreign exchange coming up as a regular issue. And of course, this shouldn't be a surprise because that's a big part of the strategic papers. Now, what you won't be expected to do, of course, because there's no calculations in the case studies, you won't be expected to do calculations of money market hedges and things like that. But you will be expected to know the various different methods of managing foreign currencies and be able to discuss each of those. And we have seen that in, actually go back to the original pilot paper, there was a big issue on that. And then some of the real exams since then, we've seen that one come up. So this throws that up then as an issue itself. Now, of course, what this also raises is a whole range of pastel type factors. Now, I said to you, look out for pastel. Okay, remember political, economic, social, technical, environmental, and legal. Okay, because we're going to find here that we've got different laws in each of those different countries. And so as you expand, that's always one of the issues, is how you adapt to those different laws and regulations. Okay, we've also got, let's put the E in here, so that's the L. Let's put in here. So it's pest L, and we'll put the L in the capital. Okay, we've also got the economic. Not only is the economic an issue, but it's going to vary from country to country and from region to region. You know, we've seen that if we're comparing Europe and Asia, that of course we've kind of just come round the other side of a big European recession. That's really only just recovering in some European countries. A lot of Asian countries have come through much, much stronger, particularly countries like China. We don't know what countries that they're already in, but there has been, you do get that changing economic position as you go country to country. So again, you could see an issue here, and this is opening up a potential new issue of further overseas expansion. And these are the kind of issues that you need to be raising when you're doing that. In fact, when you do that, let's say you're asked about a specific country, PESTEL is a very good model for you to use, because you can just go through the political issues, economic issues, social issues, technical issues, and so on in that country. Okay, so PESTEL, very good model for those overseas questions. Good. Now, another issue in here is the fact that we are talking about fashion. And fashion itself links through again to PESTEL. And it's the S, it's the social element. Fashion is fast changing. It says just down below, I've already highlighted, it's very dynamic, it's very fast changing. And we have to keep up with those social changes, with those trends. And that's going to be a critical success factor in this particular industry. So I'm going to cover quite a lot of critical success factors as we go through. Remember, a critical success factor is something you have to be really good at if you're going to be successful. And that's keeping up with fashion change. Okay, having a really good design team that design the best clothes and accessories, but they keep up with those changes in the industry. Again, now let's say you see an issue. Let's say that we find that Rio are very good at that, as we read later on, and there's an issue that's going to compromise that. That's going to mean that they're not as good in relation to the change of fashion, maybe because they're going to lay off some key staff in the fashion, the design area or something along those lines. Then that should be something we turn around and say, no, we shouldn't do that because this is a critical success factor. And this is where, I talked at the start of this video about the models being context, they being background. Then in your answer, you can turn around and say, no, we don't want to get rid of these people. Yes, it saves us costs, but this is a critical success factor in this particular industry, and therefore we want to keep those. In fact, perhaps we even want to invest more in them rather than the other way around. Okay, so fast changing industry. Okay, and then going on then, Rio designs, manufacturers and retails fashion clothing. Okay, don't just think of this company as being purely a retailer, because they have actually got a design team designing the clothes in the first place. They've got manufacturing operations, so they've got to be good at manufacturing and distribution as well. So remember that, okay? But the majority of manufacturing is outsourced, okay? So we'll go on in a later video when we come to suppliers to look at the advantages, disadvantages of outsourcing in more detail. But of course, by outsourcing, typically if you outsource often to a cheaper country, we find out just over the page they're Northern European. Well, if you outsource to Asia and China in particular, costs can be reduced very significantly. You've also got this specialist expertise and flexibility to move from manufacturer to manufacturer by outsourcing in that way. On the downside, you're very dependent on people. If it was in China we were outsourcing, then by the time those products get delivered back to Europe for the European operations, that's going to take a long time. So it's, there's pluses and minuses. Again, what we'll do is we'll look at those in relation to the specifics of this particular case when we get to that section in the case study. There's a big section on supply chain and so on. So we'll do more on that then. Okay, now this is very important. We're talking about the industry as a whole here. And it says that different competitors compete with different generic strategies. Now, do you remember the theory there? That's cost leadership, differentiation, and you remember the other element of it? Focus, like kind of niche. You know, in a sense, target markets is where focus comes in. And what's very important is as we look at Rio, we understand where their focus is and do they have a clear generic strategy. Remember Michael Porter said you must have a clear generic strategy or you'll be stuck in the middle, and we want to check where they are and make sure that they're not stuck in the middle. Also, when you come to analyze new strategies in the exam, you need to make sure that that isn't moving away from that specific generic strategy, that you're not going to be so general, so broad, that you're nothing specific and special. Okay, and well, again, we'll talk about that when we find out a little bit more about their specific generic strategies. But it's worth noting there's lots of different competitors in lots of different markets. In Porter's Five Forces, we've got a very high, in fact, I can go back up here and just put up here, we've got a very high force for competitors. Which, of course, the more competition there is, the higher the force is in that model, the less profitable the industry as a whole is. And so we need to build our whole Five Forces model, of course, which we will do as we get to the strategic analysis to understand the full impacts of the industry. But that's a very important one. Now, another critical success factor here is different brand names, and branding is critical. People will go to a particular retailer because of their brand. Superdry is one that in the UK has grown very rapidly in the last 5 or 10 years. From a brand that wasn't recognised to everyone wants to be wearing the tops with Superdry written all over them. Okay, and so that kind of element of branding becomes very, very important, particularly as you then move up to the very high quality end. And of course, when you're talking about the very high quality brands, the Polo, Ralph Lauren and people like that, the brand becomes a reason people will buy some clothing because of the brand. They might not even like what it looks like because it's the brand that becomes very, very important to them. I always remember a friend of mine saying he was at PwC and they had a fashion guru come in to tell them about what to wear and what not to wear and so on, and what suited them and what colours worked well for them. And I remember him saying, and I spoke to one of the other people there, and he turned around and said, look, I don't really care whether it looks good on me. All that I care about is the brand, because that's what it represents. It represents who I am, which is interesting. Different people have different views, but there's a lot of people that will take that view, particularly at the very upper end of the market. What we need to know is understand where Rio come in relation to those brands, okay, and what their position is going to be. Okay, but branding very important. So let's just put down critical success factor is the brand. Okay, and the retailer's ethos towards managing supply chain and the environment. In fact, we come on to look at some other critical success factors just here. In fact, you know, we can almost just kind of go on putting down critical success factor and critical success factor, and what we can do is just highlight these are things that these companies in this industry have to be good at nowadays. Okay, one of them is management of your supply chain. That's going right through from your purchasing, in fact your design, through to purchasing, through to delivery. And key here is that it's done in a responsible and sustainable way. Customers now want products that have been developed sustainably, where the suppliers have been well treated and the staff at the suppliers have been well treated. In fact, I think this is hinting at two key ethical issues. And it's worth bearing in mind that ethics is a really key topic that comes up again and again. And of course, that shouldn't be a surprise to us, because CIMA is all about doing the right thing, being a professional, upholding the highest professional responsibilities. And so at the case study, final level case study, we see a lot of ethical issues. And this is a particular one, and the first of these is the supplier itself. You know, we've stay loyal to a particular supplier rather than just, okay, no, you can't give us the lowest cost there, we're going to move on to someone else. It's that kind of thing. But also it's the staff at suppliers. And I have to be honest that in terms of my knowledge of the industry, there's been a lot of criticism of retailers and using a lot of outsourcers in Asia. We've seen this with companies like Apple, and in the fashion market, Gap has been a big one. Nike's been another big one, where there have been big problems with reputational issues through using things like child labour, and the staff at suppliers being very, very poorly paid and very, very poorly treated. And so for me, this is a big, very, very highly likely issues. I can almost guarantee you that this is going to be one of my top 10. Okay, I haven't decided on my top 10 yet, because of course I'm going to work through the whole of this case before making my final decisions. But I'd be very surprised if that one wasn't high up towards the top of my top 10, because this is a very common exam issue. And of course it's hinted at here as well. And of course we're linking on to then the environment, green credentials, and the materials being responsibly sourced and manufactured. This is more hints about how important environmental is. And of course in the pastel, let's highlight the E there, environment is one element in the pastel, of course, that's very, very important, and it's become far more important in the last 10 or 15 years. Lots of customers want clothing that's environment, and it's not environmentally friendly, sustainable. It'll be things like use of energy in the stores and the manufacturing elements in order to keep the cost of energy down, the actual type of material that's used and where that's come from, and so on. Okay, again, another important issue and another critical success factor in this industry. Now, another key point in here is something that's been changing over the last 10 years, is that there have been a lot more clothing purchases over the internet. So of course that's the T in pastel. So again, we can see we're really building up our pastel analysis in this particular one, where the internet and having an internet site is a common part of any retailer. And what we need to do is look out for what Rio do over the internet and how good they are. There could be an issue over expanding that, or you're doing more on the internet and so on as the business expands. But we need to look at that as we go into that, because obviously you do need to be online. People will go into a store, they'll try it on, but it hasn't got the right size, so they'll go home, they'll buy that over the internet, or just go online and buy it in the first place. Although it's also worth bearing in mind that this is an industry where people still prefer to see, feel and try on clothes before they purchase. And you know what it's like, does something fit or not? Well, you can buy it online and you can get it, and then if it doesn't fit, you've got to send it back, and it's a hassle. And so therefore people do like to go and try things and see them, and so that's going to remain, I think, a big part of this industry for the long term. But we still can't ignore the internet. Okay, and I could easily see there being an issue on internet usage within the company. So let's put it in here. Okay, as I said before, we need to find out how good they are online as we go later into the case. Okay. Another issue here is that companies regularly redesign their stores. Now, when you do a store redesign, again, firstly, that is a critical success factor. Okay, regularly redesigning stores. Basically, it's this whole idea of keeping up with trends, social trends, and basically continuing to be modern and fresh. And that is also worth bearing in mind that is also going to be very costly. Not the redesign itself, but doing all the stores out. But therefore, that could link through to funding, which of course is a big issue. And I could see that being an issue, which is a new store redesign, how much that's going to cost, is it a good idea, or the benefits, brings in a lot of marketing into it. But then funding comes in, it's the second part of the question. It will be a lovely topic to build an issue around. Okay. And also the importance of brand awareness. We've already said that was a critical success factor earlier. So lots of critical success factors in this industry, lots of pastel factors, and some issues such as issue about the internet, issue about redesigning stores and the costs of doing so, ethical issues in here. In fact, you know, what a fantastic first page that we've got there. And this is one of the best first pages we've had in years, because it really throws up so many different issues that could come up in the exam, things that we can apply to different models and so on. And actually, I think, I know I said I was going to do 2 pages, but I don't want any one video to go on too long. This video has already gone on for 40 minutes at this particular point, and that's long enough, I think, from a concentration point of view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the second page, the next page, in the next video. Okay, so you'll already be kind of pre-prepared when you get to that stage. Okay, so let's just kind of sum up this particular page here. Okay, I think that there are key issues that could come up here. Foreign exchange is one that could come up. There are overseas operations. Particularly, I think the most likely issue is going to be some further overseas expansion. We could see an issue in one particular country that could very well relate to something like pastel. So do use pastel. In fact, you know, it perhaps isn't an issue here that there's so many pastel type issues coming out in this particular section that could enable us to bring up a pastel analysis, particularly when talking about some overseas country. I do think ethical issues are going to be highly likely in this exam, and we've been given 2 specific hints here. Either the treatment of the suppliers themselves and the fairness of the way we treat those, or the staff at those particular suppliers, and that they are being well treated. And actually, just another point here, many suppliers now have a specific code of conduct, or retailers have a code of conduct that the suppliers have to abide by to ensure the treatment of those staff is good and strong. And so can definitely see something around that being a big issue as well. Environmental issues, yes. Internet, yes. Costing and redesign of the stores, yes. So lots of different issues that I think could come up as part of this first page. And so in the next video then we'll go on and start to look at Rio themselves and start to look at when you use different models. When you come to look internally at the business, you'll start to use things like the SWOT analysis. We'll have a look at products, potential product life cycle issues and so on. So there'll be different models that we'll start to use as we start to build up our picture of Rio as they move forward. Okay? And if you're watching our free sample video that maybe you found on YouTube or you found on our website or via one of our emails, then basically that's it. And what I just want to do is just do 2 things actually. Is if you don't go on and buy the rest of our series, I just want to remind you what you get if you do buy the series, but also just talk to you about how you can kind of do some of this analysis yourself. I know there's some people that prefer to do it that way, so let me talk you through that as well. So firstly, if you do go on and buy the rest of our video series, of course I've only covered a page so far. I took a long time over that first page, but there was so much great information in there. Okay, and I'm going to go through section by section, really focusing on the different models, more issues that can come up, really analysing that business. As I said before, we then cover F3 and do all the numbers and do a full financial analysis. We'll cover P3. We'll talk about the types of risk issues, and risk actually does come up a lot, not surprisingly, of course. We do see, again, another hint for you here, most of the questions are more E3 businessy focused. That's by far the majority, with an occasional F3 and P3. That would be the way you should be focusing your studies in terms of what tends to be most commonly coming up. Okay, that's the Preseen Analysis set of videos. But of course, I then go on and do my full strategic analysis, doing all the models and my full strategic plan. And so we've got both the strategic analysis document you can buy and the videos that support that. My top 10 issues, where I go through all the key models for all my top 10 issues. And I have to say, already, I think we've probably found a couple of issues that are going to be in the top 10 just from that first page, because there are some big hints in there. And so you can kind of see actually how the hints do get brought out in the pre-scene of where the examiners are going. Okay, so and then my industry analysis videos. The industry analysis does the full analysis of the industry, and the video gives a kind of overview summary where what I primarily do in the industry analysis is focus upon the big things that I want to pick up, because it's quite a big document, that. Okay, and I focus on the big things, particularly as they relate to Rio. So that's the video, but the document itself is really the key in relation to the industry analysis. So you get all of that if you buy all the different videos in the video series, and I hope that you'll think that's beneficial. If you do decide to go down your own route, okay, then what I'd recommend is you kind of do something similar yourself. You go through section by section through the case, and you pull out the key points as you go through. You then take each of those models and where you can use them, and they're not all relevant. Perhaps BCG might not be relevant in this case, but we'll have to see as we get through the case. Okay, and then you do those particular models, come up with your own plan, come up with your own list of what you think the most likely issues are, and then you can actually analyze what you think, how you would approach those questions. Okay, and then finally do your own industry analysis where you come up with your own industry examples, but make sure that you learn some very, very specific ones as closely as they can relate to this Rio case as possible, so that then in the exam you've got ones to hand that are in the forefront of your brain that you can just bring up and use on the exam, because you get very, very good marks for doing that. So you can do all your own industry examples and learn those as well. So that would be the way forward if you're going to kind of go it alone in terms of what you do. But I do hope you'll join me in the rest of the video series. Whatever you decide to do, I do wish you the best of luck in your studies as you go up to the exam. And let me just reiterate the importance of doing mock exams and getting good exam technique as the two key other keys to passing. It's not about the pre-seen only, it's about those other things. And probably the thing that makes the biggest difference as to whether people pass is mock exams. The more mock exams I see people do, the better they get. And so, do make sure that you practice as many exams as you can based on the Rio case. Okay, I'll leave it there. Good luck, everyone.